Good morning, everyone. This is Musna from the American Stroke Foundation. Welcome to our live Q&A on the impact of sugar on the brain and why this matters after a stroke. For more information on what we discussed today or any of our previous wellness topics, please visit our website at americanstroke.org and use the links to access our YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and blog. Please join us on the chat with your questions and comments. So let's start with what happens to the brain on sugar. The brain uses more energy than any other organ in the human body, and glucose is its primary source of fuel. So glucose is just the type of sugar that our bodies use for fuel. No matter what type of sugar we eat or what form it is, our bodies break them, most of them, down into glucose. What happens when the brain is exposed to an excessive amount of sugar in the standard American diet? In this case, more is definitely not better. There are many effects of sugar on the brain, but I'm going to focus on two. The first one is impaired cognitive skills, and the second one is drug-like effects in the reward center of the brain. So let's do the reward center of the brain first. In humans, high glycemic foods have been found to activate regions of the brain associated with the reward response and provoke more intense feelings of hunger than low glycemic foods. So high glycemic foods are digested quickly and cause a rapid increase in the blood glucose levels. Examples of high glycemic foods include processed foods, cereals, donuts, white bread, potatoes, all the things that make life fun. Low glycemic foods can help people control blood sugar levels and body weight, and they reduce the risk for health conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. So low glycemic foods have a lesser spike in the sugar, in your blood sugar. Examples of low glycemic foods include vegetables, fruits, dairy, nuts, and legumes. Eating a high glycemic index meal elicits greater brain activity in regions involved in eating behavior, reward, and craving. Over time, greater amounts of the substance are required to reach the same level of reward. This implies that overeating results in a diminished reward response and a progressively worsening addiction to low-nutrient foods rich in sugar, salt, and fat. So it's kind of a cycle, right? It hits all the regions of the brain, just like with addiction of controlled substances. It hits the reward center of the brain, so we won't like it, we want more of it, but over time our sensitivity to it decreases, so we need more to produce the same effect, and that leads to overeating. So it's kind of a cycle. Sugar also has an impact on cognitive skills. Even a single instance of elevated glucose in the bloodstream can be harmful to the brain, resulting in slowed cognitive functioning, deficits in memory, and problems with attention. Even in those without diabetes, higher sugar consumption is associated with lower scores on tests of cognitive function. These effects are thought to be due to a combination of hyperglycemia, hypertension, insulin resistance, and elevated cholesterol. Additional research also shows that a diet high in added sugar reduces the production of a brain chemical that is essential for new memory formation and learning. If anyone has any questions so far, or questions or comments, please let me know. Sugar has also been shown to have an effect on mood. Such effects may include compromised emotional processing. In healthy young people, the ability to process emotion is compromised with an elevated blood glucose. It's also shown to be the same with people with a stroke, according to a brain imaging study. Sugar can also impact your mood, resulting in increased anxiety. And there's also been an associated higher risk of depression. So how does diabetes or prediabetes impact stroke recovery? So I think we're all pretty familiar with the fact that diabetes or prediabetes or any type of insulin resistance has been shown consistently to be a risk factor for stroke. But stroke itself, having a stroke, is also a risk factor in itself for developing prediabetes or diabetes. And that's mostly because after a stroke, it can be hard to maintain the healthy eating and the activity that keeps those things in check. So it's a relationship that works both ways. So managing your blood sugar can help keep your body and brain healthy. Your brain is sensitive to the amount of glucose or sugar it receives. Both high and low blood sugar can damage blood vessels in the brain. Your body or your brain is your body's command center. It is made up of nerve cells that keep your body functioning even while you sleep. It also controls how you feel, learn, and remember. And in order to do all the work, your brain uses sugar in your blood for energy. The brain is the most energy demanding organ, needing half of all the sugar energy in the body to function properly. So if you think of it that way, right, sugar is fuel, but like I said earlier, it's definitely not a case of more is better. You want the sugar that your body can tolerate the best, and keeps you fueled without causing spikes. The best way to know where to start when it comes to that is to meet with your doctor, especially if you have had a stroke, and have a discussion about blood sugar as part of your daily or your yearly physical or your visit. You want to know what your safe blood sugar levels are, what range you need to stay in, and what kind of foods you definitely need to be incorporating. Doctors sometimes aren't always as knowledgeable about the diet portion. I mean, they can recommend, right, processed food versus not. But in terms of specific foods, if you want, as long as you know your blood sugar range with guidance from your doctor, you can work with a nutritionist, or you can just work with kind of keeping a log with yourself about how different foods have an impact on your energy levels, your mood levels, your cognition, your physical symptoms, and experiment with that. We know vegetables are good for you, but some people have bad reactions to certain compounds in certain vegetables, so they can't eat broccoli, for instance, or spinach. That's why they always suggest rotating. Even if you're eating quote-unquote healthy or clean foods, you want to rotate and keep a variety, so that you're not having too much of one thing. So now that we know, or now that we've kind of highlighted that diabetes and prediabetes are a risk factor for stroke and vice versa, how can small changes have a big impact? So the first thing you want to do is look at what you're eating and how much you're eating. So you want an awareness, just like with your blood pressure, especially if blood pressure was a contributing cause to your stroke. You want to know what your ranges, your healthy ranges are. Talk to your doctor and know what your ranges are for blood pressure. Know what your ranges are for a healthy weight for you based on your size, activity levels, and food intake. Know what your healthy levels are for blood sugar. And if you need to know, if you feel like you don't have an accurate idea of blood sugar, or you feel like you have symptoms that vary widely, ask for a way to monitor your blood sugar. Depending on your diagnosis, it can be covered by insurance, but it's always helpful to have that data, and it's always surprising how much your blood sugar can vary just with what you consider a small portion of something. Choose not to drink or drink in moderation. Stop smoking if you smoke. For healthy eating related to blood sugar, you really want to do your homework, and it's kind of, the sentiment that's kind of been echoed in all my presentations so far is that you have to put the work in on the front end, and then it becomes a lot easier and less time intensive. But things that are easy to figure out are not always the most accurate source of information. So an example of things called whole wheat versus whole grain, right? So if you go to the supermarket, let's use bread as an example. Anything that looks brown or says whole wheat, we've kind of associated this connotation of, oh, it's healthier, right? But whole wheat is not the same as whole grain. Whole wheat bread is basically just white bread that's brown, right? It's still going to spike your blood sugar the same. Whole grain has the whole, as it says, the whole grain incorporated in the bread, and so that has more fiber. That means that it's processed slower, and it causes less of a spike. So you want to look for 100% whole grain if you're looking at bread as a part of your diet, or pasta. So that's one example. Also, if you look at foods in the grocery store that say low sugar, fat-free, things like that, just know that when any food completely excludes an ingredient, it ups an ingredient on the other side. So the only way that something that is fat-free, sugar-free, is going to taste good is if it has, chemicals and additives to make it palatable and seem like something you want to eat. So just know the type of sugar you're eating and know what works best for you. The easiest way to start, the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, is definitely if you're a soda drinker, work on that. Otherwise, just, the more whole food, the better. Start limiting your processed foods. Simple as eating half the portion and having the other portion later. It doesn't take a lot, just like it only takes one instance of high glucose to kind of have the detrimental effects. Same with the benefits. It doesn't take a big change to get the benefit. Ellie Harden says, hey. Hey, Ellie. Okay. In addition to diet, the other changes you can do that can have a big impact on how sugar affects your brain and body is get regular physical activity, take your medicine as prescribed, manage stress. All the things that we know. Sugar is addictive. Sugar, for all intents and purposes on how it impacts the brain, it's a drug. And there are lots of cool videos you can actually watch online. Just Google what sugar does to the brain. And you can see the areas of the brain that it impacts, how that overlaps with controlled substances activating the same part of the brain. And sugar is in everything, and it's in everything for a reason. Why would mustard need sugar, right? Once you start looking, and there are lots of, it's not always going to say sugar, right? Fructose, glucose, dextrose, organic, honey, whatever, it's sugar's in there, guaranteed. All sugar is going to cause a change in your glucose levels and how your body responds, but some are not going to spike it as much. So sometimes people ask, well, what about honey? It's organic, I know where I'm getting it from and all that stuff. It still has the same impact. If you're having health symptoms as a result of glucose or sugar levels, honey is going to have the same impact. So you just want to look, where can you cut the processed stuff, where can you cause the spikes to be more manageable, and that always starts with processed food. So load up on your vegetables, load up on your fruits too. If some people if they talk to their doctor wants them to limit fruits, or sometimes during pregnancy if they have high blood sugar, and sometimes after a stroke too. So some fruits will spike your blood sugar quicker and higher than others, like mangoes and tropical fruits in general. Bananas, berries tend to be slower, so berries, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, those would be a good place to add your fruit. Definitely be careful with fruit smoothies. Adding 7 different types of fruit, you might as well be drinking a soda. That's a little dramatic, but Okay, Aaron McCoy says, is rice or pasta better for a person? So first I would go with what your preference is, right? Rice and pasta, there are a lot of reasons why people depending on how they grew up, where they grew up, it can be a big part of your meal. I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but definitely you want to look at whole grain versus white. So whole grain rice, whole grain pasta, you can find them with the regular rice or pasta these days. There are also a lot of pasta options made with beans, garbanzo bean pasta or chickpea pasta. Those can be hit or miss depending on how you are with texture and how much and what dish you're going to incorporate with. But as long as you're looking at whole grain, it's okay. It's okay to have that as a portion of your meal. You wouldn't necessarily have to omit it. What was I going to say? Oh, growing up myself, most of my plates were, the biggest part of my plate, it was rice or bread. And I just remember, when I started learning about nutrition and how different foods have an impact on the brain, I remember looking at the recommended portion of rice, I'm like, oh my God, how will this work? It was just such a foreign concept to my brain, but that's the normal portion, fruits and vegetables weren't really, fried okra, stuff like that, but I didn't really, my frame of reference was a lot different than what I eat now and what I know about brain health. So yes, Aaron, rice or pasta depends on preference. Try to go whole grain if you can. If you dress it the right way, you won't even know. Another tip for rice that I've picked up from patients and clients that I've worked with is, depending on how you make the rice, instead of boiling it in water, use chicken broth. low sodium chicken broth, or add like smoked paprika and things like that, and will totally change the game for negligible calories, and negative bad things, but increase the flavor. I guess you could do the same with pasta. I'm more well versed in rice and pasta. Thank you, Erin, for your question. What other questions and comments do we have? So I used to have a list, and I can share it, I can dig it up, but I used to have a list of all the ways that sugar can be, all the other alternate names that disguise sugar in ingredient lists. But the higher up in the ingredient list that an ingredient is, the more of it that's in there. So usually like water and sugar are pretty high up there. So you just want to, once you compare, you can't kind of stop, you know, and there's a very strategic reason for including sugar in everything, even things that are savory that you wouldn't think would need sugar, is because it's addictive. It keeps you coming back for more. It keeps the craving going. If we took sugar out of, like, if you've ever tasted like ketchup, for example, with no sugar added, just the natural sweetness of the tomato, it tastes very, very different than what a lot of us are used to. And to us, it can, oh, this isn't ketchup, this tastes weird. But that's what it's supposed to taste like. We've just been sensitized. We've just been used to everything being sugar loaded. On my last job, when I worked with service members, they traveled a lot, and they would always say how they could eat the same kind of foods around Europe and Asia and not have like the bloat or the discomfort or the weight gain or the issues with their blood sugar as they did in the US, because everything there, a lot of things don't have the additives added to it. A lot of stuff that is allowed to be added to our foods here is not allowed to be added to foods in Europe. And so you really have to be your own advocate and look, why is sugar added in this? How much more expensive is the non-sugar added version of it? It's becoming increasingly easy to see that stuff and have sugar-free alternatives, but it's really hard to find it at the same price point. And that won't change until more of us make a fuss about it, right? But sugar is added in quantities that it's in excessive quantities, because we demand it. As soon as they would change the sugar, we would all be in uproar. This has changed. I don't like the flavor anymore. You know, so it's like a reverse relationship. We demand theoretically healthy stuff at an accessible price point, but we also want to keep the taste and the nostalgia of what we're used to. Erin says, I knew about salt in almost everything, not sugar. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Erin. Sugar is in everything. I would say even more than salt. Once you start looking, it's in everything. You know, mustard, things like ketchup, things like mayonnaise, relatively speaking to other things, they're easy to make on your own, but again, it requires that initial input of energy, right? But once you start making a lot of, like, I have a friend who makes her own salad dressings and I don't know the last time she's bought mayonnaise and stuff like that, but she controls it, right? She knows what's going in and what's not going in. So the initial thing, when we talk about nutrition too, start a food log. Let's get an accurate idea of what you're eating and how much you're eating. And then start with the thing you're consuming in the greatest quantity. Hey, like I am, you know, pasta sauce. I use a lot of pasta sauce, so let me figure out a way that if I'm going to buy store-bought, let me do a little bit of research beforehand, find out which one has the most bang for the buck in terms of flavor, but also not an obscene amount of sugar, and or let me learn how to make it myself. Start there. Start with the thing that you're consuming the biggest quantity of, or start with the thing that's easiest to modify. The daily amount of sugar that's recommended for men and female is easily exceeded by most of us in a portion that we couldn't even imagine that would be exceeded by. But again, there's a reason for it. You know, it hits our reward center. We feel good. It keeps us coming back for more. It keeps food, it keeps things selling. So there's a reason for it. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we know that from visiting different places where sugar is not added, or if you ever taste something really fresh, farm fresh, straight from the source, without it being doctored, it's amazing. Like, we wouldn't even recognize it. To us, it may be like, oh my God, this is the best tasting apple or whatever. But that's how it's supposed to be. Things in the grocery store are there for time and efficiency. It's hard to keep things as fresh as they were from where they originated without doing something to it. And at the same time, if ever the whole grocery store had stuff that, you know, had an expiry date of 1 day or less, we would all be bothered by that too, because it's like, hey, I'm paying money, I need this to last. So it's a complex picture to solve, but it is solvable. The improvements are possible. We just have to advocate for it. So what I've done personally over the few years, and granted, I haven't adhered to it, but I at least have put in some of the work to it, again, is make a list of all the things that make me happy to eat or to share with people. And then I do research on the brands so that I don't have to think about it once I put that initial thought into it. So here's the brand that I know in the grocery store. It's not a specialty grocery store. It's like any grocery store I can go to around the area. And here's where I can buy the good ketchup, or, the ketchup that doesn't have sugar in it. Here's where I can buy the no salt and no sugar added peanut butter. Here's where I can buy that, I haven't quite gotten to the spot where I'm willing to put the time in to make my own version of it, but obviously that is a goal. I think people are always surprised that when they make something that it's very challenging to eat the same quantity of a homemade thing than it is to like binge on a store-bought. So an example is that if you make chocolate chip cookies and then you buy like a brand of chocolate chip cookies, sometimes people are like, oh, I polished off that whole box, or I polished off a whole sleeve. If you try to eat the same quantity of that cookie that you made at home, it's really hard to, because it has less, like, you don't have those additives and emulsifiers and thickeners and stabilizers that a manufacturing company has. So you're ingesting more of the real stuff, and because you're ingesting more of the real stuff, your brain recognizes and perceives it as food. And when it does that, it's going to trigger the fullness signal at some point. Versus when you're eating something that's processed, all those emulsifiers and additives and stabilizers and thickeners, those don't register as food and fuel for your body and brain. And so your fullness trigger doesn't get activated, and you only stop when you start to feel sick. So that's why they say you can eat almost everything, but make it at home. So sometimes that's a starting point for people. Hey, I'm not going to give up the pizza. I'm not going to give up the fries. Great. Start making it at home. See what impact you have. And people are often pleasantly surprised that they feel better, even though they're not, quote, cutting out the bad, quote unquote, bad foods. Aaron says, thanks to COVID, we learned to make Big Macs. Now we hardly ever go to McDonald's because ours are better, we think. That's great, Aaron. Yeah, I think a lot of people can share that experience of like COVID transitioning over, especially as the prices got more expensive, like making that same version at home and realizing not only that they're saving money, but the taste is different. Like, what is it about a Big Mac, or what is it about anything that you crave? Crave is the word, right? You crave it for a reason, because it's hitting some signal in the brain. It's making you feel good for some reason. But sometimes an exercise that I would do with patients and clients is like, what is it about that item that makes it good? Like, so a Big Mac, what is it? Is it the ratio of bread to meat? Is it the combination of like, the umami taste of the beef with the sweet of the ketchup? Like, you don't just like the burger, you like something about it. Is it the mouthfeel? Is the fact that you can hold it in your hand? Ice cream, is it the texture? Is it the temperature? Is it the combination of like, the topping that you crunch on versus the smoothness of ice cream? Once you figure out what it is that actually makes you want it, then you pull out those factors and make it your own. Okay, what other questions and comments do we have? So sugar is part of the flavor profile. That's the takeaway message. Sugar is part of that's not the takeaway message. The takeaway message is that even though sugar is part of the flavor profile, you want to be smart about your sugar, because sugar keeps us coming back for more, and it desensitizes us to the natural sweetness of things. So if you ever, it's rare that a complete 180 cold turkey approach is ever recommended for these things, but if you ever want to see just how much sugar has an impact on you, try a week or 2 weeks of no sugar, no added sugar. And so basically you would be eating vegetables, whole grains, and like lean protein. And then eat that candy bar. you will feel it. Drink that soda, you will definitely feel it. And if you think about how much that is like sprinkled throughout our day in everything we eat or drink, it's a pretty big part of what's modulating our brains and bodies, and we voluntarily ingest it. You know, we all have that, oh God, I need a sugar hit. It's 3 p.m. It's time for my sugar. You know, or the morning. For some people, the morning coffee isn't even about the caffeine. It's the fact that it's sweetened, you know? So pay attention to that and think about how much the stuff that you're voluntarily ingesting controls your mood, controls your brain fog, controls your motivation to get out of bed and get going. And is that what you want to give, you know, so much power to? Okay, let's see. Aaron says, you've mentioned Mediterranean food. Mediterranean. What are your thoughts on the Mediterranean diet to lose weight? So I think that style of diet is good because it focuses on whole foods. In terms of being effective for losing weight per se, I think that again is person dependent because it's easy to it's quantity too, right? It's not just quality. So if you eat too much of a good thing, like gluten-free cookies are still cookies, right? And it's vegan. So you eat, if you know, it's gluten-free, it's vegan, you're still going to gain weight if your diet is all that. So the Mediterranean diet, like olive oil is a big part of it, but not dousing everything with olive oil and deep frying things in olive oil, and you know, there's a difference. So the reason why diet changes are so difficult to get guidance on is because there's quote unquote research for everything, right? If you're looking for it, you can find it. You can find articles that say, you know, eat a pound of bacon a day, live forever. And another one that says you even smell bacon and you're killing yourself. Like, because the research is all anecdotal. It's based on people's self-report, which is notoriously unreliable. It's based on short durations, and also we know that like one good behavior encourages another, right? So if you say, hey, I'm going to study this diet with people and we're going to provide them with fresh healthy food, not processed stuff, whatever, like if you're eating good and you're feeling better, you're going to move more, you're going to maybe drink more water, you're going to maybe sleep better. All those contribute to the weight loss as well, right? And the same in reverse. If you wake up and you've had a bad night's sleep and you just want a sugar coffee drink and you want a donut, how likely are you going to be to want to, you know, go for your afternoon walk or do something healthy? Like, it's a chain reaction. So that's why it's so hard to find a causal relationship that yes, this type of diet is good for losing weight. The other thing I want to say is that the Mediterranean diet, you know, there was this huge study that kind of was the reference point for many, many years of this is a study that shows that the Mediterranean diet works and is good for you. And since then, a lot of holes have been punched in that research study, which with good reason. And it highlights the difficulty of doing a study like that. But if you stick to what the general idea of the Mediterranean diet is, which is focusing on healthy fats and oils, so that's avocado, nuts, olive oil in moderation, fruits, vegetables, quality whole grains. And the other thing about the Mediterranean diet is meat and protein is not used as a main dish. It's used as a side dish or a seasoning. It's not the huge chunk of the plate. So if you take those core principles and you're feeling good, everything else kind of follows with that. And if losing weight is your goal, you know, that is going to stack the odds in your favor. I hope that answered your question, Erin. Let me know if it didn't. In the end, what works best is what's realistic for you, right? The foods that are going to be the cleanest, the most organic, the ones that make your body feel the best may not fit into your budget, may not fit into your time, may not fit into your preferences, and that's okay. Start with where you are. Do the best with what you have. that is more reliable for change related to diet and managing your blood sugar than anything else anyone says. You don't have to pay a lot of money or spend time with any expert to make a big change in that. The information is there within your power, within your access, and start by eating another vegetable, another portion of vegetable. Drink that extra glass of water. Try things unsweetened. Do half a portion on the sweetened stuff. So whatever you're doing, just modify that instead of trying to do a 180. Let's see, what else was I going to say? I was going to say one more thing. Know your labels. Know the way that sugar can be labeled. I forgot what I was going to say, but one thing is there are a lot of ways to naturally sweeten things. And by natural, I don't mean like honey or stevia or raw organic brown sugar. That's all fancy, but it's still sugar. A lot of times people have used maybe a sprinkle of cinnamon or vanilla extract. Those are ways without adding a lot of chemical stuff to enhance the natural sweetness of something. If you're making a smoothie with a lot of greens, half a frozen banana, you'll have more than enough sweetness. So whenever I actually make a green smoothie, or when I get around to it, I should say, half a sweetened banana is all the sweetness you need, and it'll mask the greens. The bitter taste of the greens, I should say. Vegetables, naturally sweet, roast them instead of like steaming them or boiling them. That brings out the natural sweetness and the caramelization. We definitely, I think, in this country, definitely underutilize, in general, herbs and spices. There's so many ways to completely change the flavor profile of a food item just with that. So, yep, know your food, work with yourself, stay within your budget. If anyone has any specific questions, this is just meant to encourage a dialogue. It's definitely a very simplistic presentation, but if anyone has specific challenges that they're working with, or if anything sounds like, yeah, easier said than done, let her put her money where her mouth is, email me and let me know so that we can problem solve together. This is part of what this Facebook Live Q&A is meant to do, is to be like, okay, I know all this information, it all sounds good, and I understand it objectively in a cognitive level, but how do I actually incorporate it into my life? Okay, so next Thursday, I will be live from our North Kansas location, and we will talk about sleep and setting up a bedroom environment that's conducive to good sleep. So how you set up your bedroom, everything from lighting to the type of sheets you have, will affect the ability of your brain to quiet down, and the ability to keep your body comfortable. And after a stroke, both those things can be impacted, right? It may be harder to wind down, and you may be moving around a lot more because your body feels different. So next week we're going to talk about that. If you have any questions, there'll be a link on Facebook to submit questions and comments in advance. We really want to hear from you because we want to make this as useful as possible. If there are any questions from today or any of the previous wellness topics, please email us at americanstroke.org. Okay, I think that's it. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.